Today, we are going to unpack one of the most incredible business stories of our time. It's that classic David versus Goliath tale, but for the modern age. It's all about how a tiny little startup with nothing but some red envelopes and a huge idea managed to completely bring down an entire industry giant. This is the story of Netflix versus Blockbuster. I want you to just picture it for a second. Go back to the early 2000s. If you wanted to watch a movie on a Friday night, there was really only one place you were going. You remember it, right? That smell of popcorn, the blue and yellow ticket logo. One company had an absolute chokehold on home entertainment. I'm talking over 9,000 stores all over the world, millions of customers, and a brand that honestly seemed untouchable. That company, of course, was Blockbuster. But okay, let's fast forward to right now. That massive empire, it's gone. Vanished. Out of all those thousands of stores that were in every single town, there's only one left. And it's basically a tourist attraction now, a relic. It is an absolutely unbelievable collapse when you think about it. So that's the big question, isn't it? How in the world did that happen? How did a small, scrappy little startup that literally just mailed DVDs in plain red envelopes, how did they defeat a global giant? Well, the answer is a wild story of frustration, brilliant innovation, and, yeah, one of the biggest missed opportunities in business history. So where does a revolution like this even start? Well, it wasn't in some fancy boardroom with a bunch of spreadsheets. Nope. For Netflix, the spark was a moment of pure, relatable annoyance. A single, frustrating experience that led to an idea that would change, well, everything. So our story kicks off way back in 1997. We've got two entrepreneurs, Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph, and they start a company out in California. Now, they saw this brand new format coming out, the DVD. And unlike those big, clunky VHS tapes, DVDs were small, they were light, and most importantly, they were super cheap to mail. And that specific advantage was what they wanted to build a whole business around. And that company was Netflix. And the legend, the founding myth, goes something like this. Reed Hastings had rented the movie Apollo 13 from his local Blockbuster, and he was late returning it, like weeks late. And when he finally shuffled back in to return it, he got slammed with a massive $40 late fee. He was annoyed, maybe a little embarrassed, but on that drive home, that frustration started to morph into a question. He started thinking, what if the whole model was just different? What if you could rent movies without any due dates, without any penalties, without that little bit of anxiety in the back of your head that you have to rush back to the store? That simple what-if moment, that was the seed that would grow into the Netflix we all know today. And when you look at it side by side, you see two completely different ways of thinking. The Blockbuster model, it was built on physical stores, and this is the kicker, on late fees. I mean, at their peak, late fees made up something like 16% of their revenue. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. It was a business model that kind of relied on punishing you. Netflix just flipped that on its head. No stores, just mail. No late fees, just a flat monthly subscription you could predict. It was all about convenience, and it put the customer first. But even with a great idea, the early days were really, really tough. Netflix was this tiny little fish in a massive ocean, and that entire ocean was owned by Blockbuster. And that brings us to this one pivotal moment in the year 2000. It was a meeting that could have changed everything, and a rejection that would go down as a truly historic mistake. It's so important to remember this. Netflix was not an overnight success. Far from it. By the year 2000, the company was just hemorrhaging cash. The dot-com bubble was about to burst, investors were getting scared, and frankly, Netflix was staring into the abyss. They had this cool, innovative model, but they were right on the verge of complete failure. So Reed Hastings cooks up this bold, last-ditch plan to save his company. He and his team, they fly to Dallas to meet with the top brass at Blockbuster headquarters. The plan was pretty simple, really. Hey, Blockbuster, you buy us, and we, Netflix, will become your online brand. We'll run the whole internet side of the business for you. And this was the price tag they put on the table, $50 million. Now, I know that sounds like a lot of money, but for a multi-billion-dollar giant like Blockbuster, it was pocket change. It was a rounding error in their budget. For that price, they could have owned the very company that would, just a few years later, become their executioner. So how did the Blockbuster executives react? Well, according to Netflix co-founder Mark Randolph, they didn't just say no. They actually struggled to keep a straight face. They basically laughed them out of the room. In their minds, This little mail-order DVD service was a joke, a tiny niche business that was absolutely no threat to their retail empire. It was an act of corporate arrogance that would literally seal their fate. So, laughed out of the room and pretty much left for dead, Netflix was on its own. They now had to fight for their lives, especially with the entire tech world collapsing around them. This next chapter, it's all about pure survival, and one of the most stunning turnarounds you'll ever see. Just think about this sequence of events for a minute. In 2000, they are nearly laughed out of existence by the biggest player in the game. In 2001, the dot-com bubble bursts, wiping out thousands of internet companies. I mean, by all logic, Netflix should have been dead and buried right there. But instead, through just pure grit, they not only survived, but they managed to go public with a successful IPO just 1 year later. It's insane. So how did they pull it off? Well, while all these other tech companies were failing, something else was happening. DVD players were exploding in popularity in homes all across America, and Netflix had spent years building this incredibly efficient distribution system. They were perfectly positioned to ride that wave. By the time they went public, they had already grown to 600,000 loyal subscribers. They had found their footing for sure. Okay, so now the DVD by mail business is finally thriving. Most companies would have just doubled down, right? Focus on what's working. But not Reed Hastings. He was always paranoid about what was coming next. He knew physical discs wouldn't last forever, and he was ready to make a huge bet that would actually compete with his own successful business. It was a bet on the future. And that next big thing was, of course, streaming. The idea that you wouldn't even need a disc anymore. You could just click a button and watch something instantly through your internet connection. I know, today that's just how we live, but back then it was a radical, almost science fiction level idea. And this timeline, wow, it just shows you the direct consequences of that bet. In 2007, Netflix launches its Watch Instantly streaming service. And look, the library was tiny at first, and internet speeds weren't great, but they poured money into it because they saw where things were headed. Meanwhile, Blockbuster was trapped. They were weighed down by thousands of expensive store leases and the business model that was impossible to change quickly. Just 3 years after Netflix launched streaming, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy. The game was officially over. Winning the war with Blockbuster was one thing, but Netflix was not done reinventing itself. Not even close. The next major pivot was just as revolutionary as the move to streaming. They decided to stop just delivering content and start creating it themselves. And this strategic shift was absolutely brilliant. See, as just a distributor, Netflix was always at the mercy of the big Hollywood studios. They could jack up the prices for shows or just pull their content whenever they wanted. But by creating their own stuff, Netflix could control its own destiny. They could build a library of exclusive content you literally could not get anywhere else, which gave people a huge reason to subscribe, and maybe more importantly, to stay subscribed. They kicked the whole thing off in 2013 with House of Cards, which was this massive critical and commercial smash hit. It proved their model could work, and that was followed by a whole wave of iconic hits you know and love. Stranger Things, The Crown, which cemented Netflix's new identity as a top-tier production studio. So when you look back at this whole incredible journey, from a $40 late fee to a global entertainment titan, what are the lessons? What can we learn from how Netflix managed to topple a giant that seemed completely invincible? It really boils down to 3 things. First, vision. Netflix saw the future, not just once, but twice. They saw the shift from stores to mail, and then from mail to streaming, way before anyone else did. Second, commitment. It's one thing to see the future, but they backed it up with billions of dollars investing in new, unproven technology. And finally, courage. They just had the guts to believe that a small startup could actually take on the biggest company in their industry and win. And all of that brings us to one last big question. The story of Netflix and Blockbuster is this powerful reminder that no industry leader, no matter how big, is safe from disruption. And it really makes you wonder, which of today's dominant, unbeatable companies might be laughing off the next little startup with a revolutionary idea? Who is the Blockbuster of today?